I am a CTO. I am a founder of a few companies. My current company is Fansunite, fansunite.com. We are a iGaming company, which is regulated gambling. It is a Canadian company. I just happen to be currently located in Europe. And that's in a few ways actually related to the topic that I'd like to talk to about tonight, which is distributed and virtual teams. So I have my notes in front of me. It's the first time I've given this talk, but it's something I've done a lot of research on, so let's have a go. So I thought I'd start with a little bit more about who am I and why can I talk about this topic. So on the technical front, I've been involved in development, either hands-on myself or attempting to lead and facilitate it for over 35 years now. I started very, very early on with open source projects and bulletin board systems, various dial-up technologies, modems and so on, long before we had HTTP and other tools to play with. Early on in my career, I was actually involved with one of the older forum systems called vBulletin. That team and company was wholly remote around the world, and I learned a lot about not only developing as a member of a remote team, but the aspects and what was important between team members. So I've lived through it, and now I am in a position where I take care of a team that is remote as well. Obviously with COVID, this is either a forced situation on many, many people, or it was actually a situation that a lot of companies were in, and it's been accelerated, that being working from home, spread around the world, so on. So in my organization, I am responsible for the technology and product areas of the company. So I have to oversee 4 different teams, the interaction between those teams, the communication, the goals, and the delivery. So while my background is overwhelmingly technical, my primary responsibility, being in a position of leadership, is to the people of my team, making sure that all the aspects of how we function as an organization is working. Obviously, being technical in that environment is important, so I can speak to the architecture and the development plans and various technologies we're using, regulations, security, these kinds of things. But ultimately, it is all about people. So what have I done that means that I can talk about this stuff? From what I've just mentioned, about 10 years ago now, I actually trained as a counselor because I realized that a large part of my role, my position, my professional growth is far more to do with the interactions between people, working with frustrations, working with groups, facilitating groups, than it is being just purely technical or even more technical. So that gave me a very good insight into areas of the topic I'm going to talk about. So I actually can't remember the exact wording of my speech, my topic for today, but it is basically how to facilitate and manage virtual teams. So over the course of the last 8, managing software and product development in virtual distributed teams. Excellent, thank you. All the buzzwords. So over the period of about 8 years, culminating last year, I was actually doing a master's degree in systems thinking in practice. My final research paper is what I'm drawing on tonight to share with you, or this afternoon, depending on where you are, which is bringing together 3 different areas of research, being project management, communications, and group dynamics. These are 3 topics that I researched many peer-reviewed journals and papers to understand what are the common topics from these 3 different theories, group areas of research, when focused in a virtual team environment. What do they all talk about? What are the common aspects, the common things that each of these areas of research talk about. So if you can imagine a Venn diagram and these three topics are overlaying, what's the bit in the middle that they all go on about, and how do those pieces relate to each other? So before I jump into that, I just thought I'd give a little clarification of what I'm not going to talk about, just so you understand the boundaries of what's in and what's out kind of thing for the next few minutes. So I'm not going to be talking about ergonomics, chairs at home, heights at desk, the human physical aspect of working from home. A lot of people don't have actual dedicated home offices, things like that. I'm not going to get into that bit. Things like managing children. I think we've all seen lots of videos online of people being on Zoom calls and crazy things happening in the background. Quite funny, but not what I'm going to go on about tonight. And the other would be the work-life balance. All these things came up in my research, but I didn't include them. Disconnecting from work while at home is obviously can be a big challenge, and learning to manage that is important. So to the research itself, I'm going to do my share here. So what I did was I researched about 150 different papers. It's on my LinkedIn, it's on my blog, jeremyhutchings.com, and pulled together the 7 common points that are a part of all virtual and distributed teams. I researched how do they interact together, and what should we be mindful of, either as a team member, which we all are in this context, or for individuals like myself who are responsible for leading or facilitating or being aware and responsible of the teams. So what I'll do is I'll share my one diagram. I don't have 50 slides to go through. And then I'd just like to talk through each of the points, highlight a couple of the important aspects of each and how they relate to each other, and then I can summarize. So I've never been a fan of putting a PowerPoint up and then just reading through the PowerPoint, but I think this is the one diagram that most people ask me about or I use when I'm trying to explain my research. So I would say in no particular order I'll go through them, because they're all interdependent, they're all interrelated. But there is one on there that if we don't have, pretty much nothing happens, and that is trust. And in my research, I found a very interesting, or a definition of trust that I really liked, that I thought I'd share for you today. So I've got to read it out, it's a bit long, I can't remember it. So Mayer describes trust as the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party based on the expectations that the other will perform a particular action important to the truster, irrespective to the ability to monitor or control that party. So it's basically, you're asking someone to do something and you're trusting they're going to do it. This, in a way, pretty much underpins the majority of the way that we work. In my role, I don't believe that I have power over my team and I wield it like some dictator. I'm sure there's been moments and a few team members that will disagree with that, but for the most part, I think that's true. The people that we work with, or the team members that I work with choose to respond to requests. So having trust there that we will all be doing what we say we will do and what we're claiming to do is obviously pretty much the foundation of all of this. Just to move on to the next point there, culture. Culture's talked about an awful lot. It's a very, very big term. It covers a huge amount of different things. Some people experience it negatively, some people don't pay much attention to it. I'm not here to attempt to say what is a good culture or what isn't a good culture, only that it is a vitally important part of a group dynamic and a virtual team to be aware of. The research actually supports that the impact of culture or cultural differences is greatly increased in virtual teams. probably because of the lack of interpersonal communication cues when we're face to face. So this is a very important aspect to be aware of. Now, this, to take a step back very quickly, this is a model that I use to be mindful of the behavior within my team, or when managing change or communication, or what have I forgotten about when I'm doing a thing, when we're bringing in a new team member, and so on. Back to it now, just to leadership. So leadership, for someone like myself, I don't believe is inherent in my role. It's not my job to be a leader, but I facilitate the position of a leader a lot of the time. At different times, different members of the team are in the leadership role. I'm not the expert in everything, and I certainly don't have all the answers. So that the one aspect that I am mindful of, though, because it is my responsibility, is to ensure that there is leadership in the team at this moment. Are we all, wandering around and there's no guidance, that kind of thing, or is the expert in the room the person actually talking? So I like to think of it more of as a function within a team, opposed to that's the leader and we're not. It's a very fluid aspect. Also, within leadership comes a very, very important point, which it directly relates to the virtual and the distance aspect. And that is, I just used the word, sorry, distance. So there are 4 distances that I focused on to give us a context for how we think about virtual teams. The classic one, I'm here in Europe, I'm actually in Ireland, I'm not in the UK, is geographical distance, so the miles between us. That's quite an easy one. The next one is temporal, so time. It's 8:20 here, it's earlier in Toronto, so that is a distance. How do we measure? How do we think of ourselves in context to others? The third one would be organizational distance. So the classic cliche there would be the super driven salesperson who's focused on the future and getting the deal done, and might, say anything that needs to be said to get the deal done. And then on the other end of this invented spectrum is a technical person, a programmer who has to deliver with the classic, oh, what did they promise the client now? Oh, no, I can't do that. So that would be an example of an organizational distance. How far apart are we? People on the same technical team would have a much closer one. Sales to technical, a bit far away maybe. So just thinking of the distance there. The fourth one, which relates to the point I just talked, is cultural distance, because I'm not trying to say what culture is good and what culture is bad, only that it exists and we pay attention to it. We can be culturally different. So for instance, different countries around the world with different languages, with different behavioral norms, will be in a way distant, not good, bad, different, that kind of thing, better or worse, just different. So what is the cultural distance between either team members or different teams? So for instance, you could have an organization in North America that has a remote development team. They're probably going to be distant on all of these aspects I just mentioned. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of, and what are the impacts and how do we manage and communicate those things. Next point, how are we doing on time? Not too bad, okay. Next point would be goals. So goals comes up in absolutely everything. Without knowing where we're going, what we're trying to do, it's a bit tricky to get things done. So goal setting and goal communicating was important against all the research papers that I went through. So one of the aspects of goals, and just to reiterate, the 3 topics that I pulled the research papers from was project management, communications, and groups. Communications spoke to everything on this screen, as they all did, obviously, but communication came up in goals quite a lot. And a key piece to be mindful of there that I found is broadcasting communication, as I am right now to you all, is not the same as information being heard and understood and comprehended. I'm making that assumption, but along the way, things will be misunderstood, things will be kind of corrupted, if you like, if we're going to use technical terms, like, an API response isn't what you were expecting. So just to broadcast information saying this is the goal isn't good enough. It should be a starting point for eliciting questions, clarifying questions, saying, oh, we must do X by Y time zone. I don't understand what X is. These are conversations that lead to the clarification and actually closing certain distances in sometimes. And moving on again, excuse me, is processes. So working as a team, clearly having a process for whatever it is you're doing is necessary. Now, processes itself can be incredibly rigid, NASA levels of putting people on the moon, and you're managing massive amounts of risk. The processes will probably reflect that. I'm not saying that a process has to be brilliant or terrible or anything. I'm only suggesting that it should exist, because then you have a place for improvement, constant improvement. As long as there is a process, you can iterate on the improvement. Sprint development processes with retrospectives every week is an example of a great way of constantly improving on a process. But as an organization and a team, it's important throughout all the areas. So second to last point now, the team structure and team building, the middle of the diagram there. So in a virtual and remote team, this is quite interesting because the physical distances are typically the ones in place, and the temporal. If people are just going to bed as others are getting up, how do you create a team environment, a team structure, team building? Again, a lot of this comes back to communication and shared goals. If we focus very clearly on communicating regularly and understanding the cultural and the trust aspects, the team building is an emergence of that, especially as the goals start getting completed, because that's a shared winning experience or a shared success, depending on your context and what you're up to. There are several notes on the diagram there. I hope they're readable. If not, they'll be on the blog, as will the list of all the papers I went through, if there's any interest there. Obviously, they're all interrelated. So the final one, which is probably fairly self-explanatory, would be asynchronous behaviors. So we can't all be talking to each other at the same time. We don't all work at the same time, and we can't stop working while we're waiting for someone else to do something. In the same way that the difference between having a telephone call, synchronous, you both have to be there at the same time typically, unless you're leaving a message, I suppose, versus email. So managing asynchronous working behaviors is vitally important in virtual teams. Understanding the ordering of work within a day such that you can effectively fire and forget. You send all your emails, you do your parcel of work and pass it on to the other members in the team, and they in turn do the same, so that there's not a lot of waiting between the working aspects. So the final thing I think I'd pull it all together with is, so what? What's the point of all this? How do we use it, and why should I think about it? That kind of thing. So putting this into a kind of a working practice, as I mentioned earlier, I just use this as a guide. I just glance at it when I'm thinking about making a change, when I'm bringing on a team member. Reminds me of the distance. Did I communicate the goals? Does this person feel trusted? Do they understand where the leadership is in the process at the moment? This kind of thing. And one of the nice terms that came out that I found in the research again was the 5 W's of team communication, which is who, what, where, when, and why. So each of those 5 can be applied to each of these 7 points that I pulled out of the research. And typically that goes hand in hand with building the connections between people, which underpins all of this. So I think with the definition of trust and that communication, one of the practical examples I can give from my team for this is we use Slack to communicate for most of our chat. And I don't know the company, and I'm not getting a referral for this or anything like that, but we use a system called Donut. And what Donut does is it randomly picks different members of the team, and it ensures that they have a donut time, like 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, where you don't talk about work. So it replaces, or it attempts to substitute what could be the water cooler chat. Reminds us that we're all human beings, that we all, have lives outside of this virtual world. That's just one of my tidbits to leave you on. That was a great find, a great piece of learning from our team.
I think everybody in the tech world, whether we like it or not, companies have had to adapt to remote work as just to get the work done. Really, nobody's going into the office with it due to COVID and such. Just wanted to know from your perspective, in that transition to going from in office to potentially remote, what and with all this in mind, if you could give advice to another CTO in how to most effectively manage remote teams, what little piece of information or what piece of advice would you share with other CTOs who are in this situation?
For sure. The term over communicate probably isn't used enough, and you have to really, really over communicate to stop wasting time or to do it too much. It's like pantomime. You can always go an extra 10%. The second thing I would say is, and it comes back to the asynchronous style of working I was talking about, is it is vital that the summary of conversations or decisions are captured, they're written down. We have a project management tool, we use Teamwork, there's Jira, all the tools out there. Any conversation that's had, any decision that's made verbally always gets captured into a task, and that's it for 2 people sitting next to each other in an office. Do it so there is a equal level of visibility across the entire organization.
I think for me, I've learned keeping people accountable and setting targets and goals and hey, and I think, mate, trust is so important in any relationship, really, to have the trust of your colleagues and as I suppose, keeping people accountable and making sure that they are delivering. But I think, it definitely comes down to trust. What communication means are you using to manage a distributed team? I think you mentioned, is it donutteam.com? I thought that was such a cool little tool.
That's a plugin for Slack.
Cool. Okay.
We use Slack for just about everything, for our written communications and the occasional video call. Things like Donut is the reminder, the thing that prods us to have those casual conversations that get lost a lot when we're focused so much on email, it's Zoom, it's Slack. It trends towards dehumanizing your team members, because your only interaction with them in that context is very dry. You're not getting the facial expressions, you're not getting hand waving, you're not getting cues. Things like Donut, which is face-to-face video chat time, where you're encouraged to not talk about work. Now, what's your day like? How did you get on this morning? Yeah, you seem a bit down. You okay? I'm not saying that everyone has to be completely friends with everyone, but not being friends, I mean to be beyond professional all the time, but just being human. We all have good days and bad days. Just connecting underpins, because if I have a much stronger human connection with a member of my team and I get an email that I could have misinterpreted, or I could have thought, oh, that was a bit harsh. Why did they say that? I'll think about it completely differently. I'm like, oh, well, it's Bob. Bob's great. You know, he probably just mistyped it or something, or he was thinking of something else. It's those connections that hold us together. Obviously, COVID is a massive thing. You know, it's impacted the world. It's impacted a lot of people, overwhelmingly negatively. And there are a lot of people out there struggling to deal with the rapid change in their working environment, if they're lucky enough to still have their jobs, that kind of thing. So being mindful of the person who is X distance away, be it temporarily, culturally, whatever it is, could be having a genuinely hard time. So, you know, just being mindful of who's on the other end of that communication is very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's just good, just life advice, really. Just say, you know, be mindful of who you're talking to, and they might have had a crappy day as well. How do you handle management and leaders that aren't on board with remote working? Really great question.
Oh yeah. I guess there's two things there. If you're a member of a team, let's say an employee, and the leadership or the people who make the decisions aren't on board with that, it's going to be tricky. There's an inherent power imbalance there. I think with a lot of resistance to situations like, hey, let's do it this way, and the answer is no, or there's resistance there, find out why. Is it going to come back to trust, for instance? I mean, I know a couple of the big organizations, technical organizations out there, have gone for remote working. It's like, well, it's forced on us. I think it was Twitter, was it, that made a statement that a lot of their people can be remote now. And Google did go for it, but now they're starting to backtrack a little bit. I think it's going to be, it's definitely going to come back to asking, what is your concern with it? I'm not trying to sell it or justify it, but if I can understand why you're hesitant to it, maybe we can go down that area and it'll uncover other things. I'd say from personal experience in my own growth and from working with other teams, an awful lot of it comes down to trust. I trust that my team will deliver what they say they will deliver by whenever they deliver it. If they're sat at their computer at 9:05 in the morning, or if they actually get there at 10, as long as the work gets done, from my point of view, that's what's agreed. If someone's super smart and they've got children to deal with, or you know, they have an emergency during the day, or they're like, oh, I'll go to the shops at 2 because it's quieter, something like that. I think that's a mindset that once leadership starts to understand, gets repaid in droves. In my experience of my current team, I have always said family first. You ever have an emergency with, you know, anything in the real world, shall we say, outside of work, deal with it, you know, that kind of thing. We'll deal with the work itself when the time comes in the future. So I think moving to a more fluid kind of understanding of how people actually live their lives, how technology people online work, is important. And asking people there, why could they be resistant, or what are their concerns with it, will actually get to a deeper issue.
Curious to get your thoughts, Jeremy, on the old 4-day work week that the kind of the world is talking about. I think Spain or something, some European country said, yeah, let's do it. I mean, they've got siestas during the day, so I don't think 4-day work week for them was too much of a stretch. But I mean, talk about your cultural differences. Like it's literally, it's like, yeah, go home, sleep for a couple of hours, come back and do your work later. Awesome. Definitely would be interesting working in Spain. But 4-day work week, mate, what are your thoughts there?
I think it makes sense. I understand the psychology of being in flow. Excuse me. So the psychology of being in flow, being highly, highly engaged to the point of losing concept of time or perspective of time while you're working, absolutely loving what you're doing, is easier to engage with in shorter periods. I mean, we can't stay in flow for days at an end. It's usually a couple of hours kind of thing, or maybe half a day. I think it is reasonable or understandable that people will have the same level of efficiency in 4 days than they will in 5, because they will be more balanced with their routine and their life. For instance, my wife works a 4-day week. I've spoken to her about it, and she says that she doesn't typically do that much less work. Gets paid less, obviously, because it's, hours and time and that kind of thing. But is comparatively as productive, because it's not this, oh God, Friday, it's so far away. How the hell am I going to, that kind of thing. It's like, oh, it's Tuesday. I'm halfway through my week already, that kind of thing. So I think changing the hours and the way we think about work helps quite a lot. But you still have to balance it with I'm at work now, I'm not at work now. Otherwise, we're always at work.
Yeah, I think it's a paradigm shift, isn't it? And it's changing your state of mind too. And it's not going to work. I mean, I can just have some of the business relationships I have myself. I'm like, you would totally not survive a 4-day work week, because your productivity would just crash. Because to be fair, you're rubbish at your job. I think a 4-day work week is only going to work in specific environments. We don't want our Tesco or Coles or Metro to go 4-day work week, because then we're like, hey, this is like, where am I going to get my bread and all that, or my groceries? So for specific environments, I think it has to be a cultural shift for the business. I think what I heard as well is that they were actually stretching out the days. So you work 4 days, but instead of 8-hour days, you're working 10-hour days. So you're still working 40 hours.
Well, there's two different points there. For instance, you said Tesco's and Coles, which luckily I know what that is from watching Australian MasterChef. The business operating hours is not the people's working hours when it's a team.
True.
Coles could be 24 hours staffed entirely with people doing 4-day weeks.
Yeah, that's a very valid point too. I guess if Coles was only open Monday to Thursday, though, I think that would be a problem. But if people had their 4-day work weeks, yeah, definitely.